You've seen those range tests, I'm sure you have, all over the internet. People going 2, 3, 4 miles, 5 miles. But is that legal? So let's dig into the rules and see what it looks like. So let's just start out with the recreational, and then we'll go into the 107, and I'm going to dissect the rules a little bit. If you're wondering about the 44809 and some of the more detail that is available there, they did come out with an advisory circular, the FAA did, which is interesting because in this advisory circular, they further define some of the things which maybe are a little unclear or maybe needed a little more clarification, or probably ones they got a lot of questions on to the FAA Support Center. And in this circular, 91.57C, it says, the aircraft flown within the visual line of sight of the person operating the aircraft or a visual observer co-located in the direct communication with the operator. This means either that the recreational flyer or the visual observer must have eyes on the aircraft at all times to ensure it is not a collision hazard to other aircraft or people on the ground. So that means one or the other has to be able to visually see the aircraft at all times. And you say, well, that's okay, because you know what? I have my eye on the camera and the visual observer sees it. We're good. So the next step would be, well, if my visual observer needs to see it and I don't, which is what it's saying, well, then I will put my visual observer half a mile down the road. The thing you have to keep in mind there is that the rules say visual observers need to be co-located with the recreational flyer and able to communicate directly with the recreational flyer without the use of technological assistance. So now that means if they're a half mile or a mile away and we're talking via cell phone or we're talking via walkie-talkie, that no longer meets the regulation for a co-located visual observer. So that, by the nature of it, you cannot daisy chain your visual observer down a path. They must be near you. And of course, that makes sense. They're trying to keep it safe. And what they're doing by having the visual observer is allowing the pilot in command to look down at your controls or look away for an instant. And if something happens to where there's an aircraft or some other type of an obstruction or a tree, the visual observer can notify the pilot to look up, and then the pilot can see what's happening and react immediately to what's going on. So that's what they're trying to get at. The next thing would be, well, as a recreational pilot, I heard there is waivers I can get. You know, the heck with it. I'm just going to apply for this waiver. I'm going to make sure that I can fly beyond visual line of sight because I want to go miles because I'm doing my range test, right? I'm doing it legally, so I have a waiver. I'm telling everybody I have a waiver. Well, this is not available for a recreational flyer. It's simply not available. So in a nutshell, as a recreational pilot, you cannot fly beyond visual line of sight. And if you have a visual observer, they must be right next to you. So you cannot go farther than a normal person would be able to see and control that drone within your normal vision. It definitely means that you cannot go 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles, and way beyond. There's no way somebody can see that craft and avoid a collision if something's happening far away. It just isn't possible. So for recreational, absolutely just not an option. So the next thing would be, you'd say, well, you know, I'm going to just become 107. So the Part 107 is regulated under the 14 CFR Part 107. And this 107.31 says, throughout the entire flight of the small unmanned aircraft, the ability described in paragraph A must be exercised either by a remote pilot in command or a visual observer. So it seems to me that the 107 then has a loophole that you can fly without a co-located. That word does not exist in this part of the rule. So you don't have to have them next to you, so you can daisy chain them farther. I could use binoculars because it doesn't say anything about having aid to your vision, so I could use binoculars. And also, I could communicate via cell phone or a walkie-talkie. It doesn't say anything about electronic means of communication. So for 107, that must be what all these people are doing on the internet. They have a 107, they have communication via cell phone, and they have people lined up, daisy-chained throughout one every half a mile, or they move with the drone, and that's what they're doing, right? So when we see all these range tests, we see people out there, that must be what they're doing. So I looked a little farther. It says, with vision that is unaided by any device other than corrective lenses, the remote pilot in command, the visual observer, and the person manipulating the flight control of the unmanned aircraft system must be able to see the unmanned aircraft throughout the entire flight. How is it now that these pilots are doing a range test this far? There must be something, of course, that I'm missing, right? There's some other thing that exempts us, or there's some other type of a waiver they have. So you know how I roll, and I reached out to the FAA specifically to say, okay, I want to fly beyond visual line of sight. I'm going to daisy chain my visual observers, and I want to be in compliance. I want to be able to do what these people are doing. So the response read this way. Throughout the entire flight of the small unmanned aircraft, the ability described in paragraph A must be exercised by either the remote pilot in command and the person manipulating flight controls of the small aircraft, or a visual observer, which we already knew that. But he continued, if uncertainty remains, then we turn to the rules preamble. Most remote pilots opt out of reading the 600 pages of preamble. We in the UAS Support Center don't have that option, because a preamble not only reiterates what the rule says, but it goes into the rationale of why it says what it does and contains a wealth of clarity. Allowing remote pilots to extend their visual line of sight through the use of one or more visual observers may introduce new hazards into the operation. Allowing daisy chaining of visual observers to fly the unmanned aircraft beyond line of sight of the remote pilot in command would result in a delay of the remote pilot's reaction time, because the visual observer would have to verbalize any hazard, and the remote pilot would be unable to look up and directly see the situation. And he continues, because a delay in reaction time may introduce new hazards into the operation, this rule will retain the requirement that the remote pilot in command and the person manipulating the flight controls of the UAS must be able to see the small unmanned aircraft throughout the entire flight. And his last quote to me was, bottom line, Part 107 specifically prohibits using a VO to extend your visual line of sight. So with that said, I could not find a way where a range test and flying beyond visual line of sight for either the recreational or the 107 is legal according to the FAA. Now you might say, of course, but look at all these people are doing it. We see these range tests, right? That's true, but that doesn't mean it's legal. So I can only assume, because you're watching this video, you're interested to find out what's legal, not what other people are doing, because you could do that on your own. But according to the rules, whether you're recreational or 107, you cannot simply fly beyond visual line of sight. You cannot use walkie-talkies. You cannot extend the visual line of sight with visual observers like daisy chaining them. You cannot do that. One last thing I should mention is that with the Part 107, there is the possibility of getting a waiver, but it is one of those that is very, very difficult. It's very uncommon. Speaking of airplanes, it's very uncommon for a 107 pilot to be able to get a beyond visual line of sight waiver. So if you think you're going to get a waiver, it's one of those that's really sought after and very, very difficult. There's very few that have actually been granted. So yes, you could probably apply for that, but in all likelihood, you're not going to receive a beyond visual line of sight. Now, that is one nice thing about the remote ideas. They're talking about having that possibility later, but of course, we don't have that now, so this is where we sit. So with that, I hope you guys found this useful, and if you did like me talking about specific parts of the rule and you want me to do more of that, break down more rules, things like that, let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to do it. And of course, if you like this video or learned something you didn't know before, click that like and subscribe so you don't miss the future content. And with that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.